Thanks, Adam, and good morning, everyone. I'm Michael Brick. I'm from Microsoft. I'm actually the legal guy, which you're probably now saying, why did I come to hear from the legal guy? I guess in part I spend a fair amount of time, in addition to negotiating limitation of liability clauses in our contracts with our customers, actually talking about cybersecurity. And as Adam said, talking to boards of directors, talking to compliance people in our customer organizations about cybersecurity. And the reason in part why the legal team at Microsoft plays this role or got into this role is we actually have a big team based in Seattle, Washington, where I'm from originally, called the Digital Crimes Unit. And so in addition to building security functionality into our products, we actually have a whole team of lawyers and forensic analysts who go after the bad guys, go after ransomware and malware, etc. So that really has brought my group or my team globally into the cybersecurity arena. So what I'm going to talk today, the framework that I operate under and that I talk to people about, people like yourselves, is protect, detect, and respond. In my experience, sometimes you go to something like this and somebody like myself will stand up and talk about, or the Institute of Directors, and talk about how cybersecurity is important, security is important, and they'll show headlines, right, about all the companies that have been attacked and all the intellectual property that's been lost. And it in some ways comes off as a lot of scaremongering, right? And I don't want to be that guy. I want to be the guy. I want to be the IT vendor that gives you more of a framework to deal with. And so as we are in the 19 minutes that I have left, I want you to think about cybersecurity from how it works in your own organization, what your plan is. I'm going to talk a fair amount about WannaCry from the Microsoft perspective, since it basically was an attack on Microsoft's platform and operating system. And I want you to think about what would you have done or what will you do when the next attack comes along. A good place to quickly ground this discussion is the growth and expansion of the internet. And hopefully that'll become apparent as why I'm starting here in a minute. But I want to go back to 2005. And if I'll have the next three slides are 2005, 2015, and then projections for 2025 around the growth and expansion of the internet. And so basically, the way to read this somewhat obscure slide is that the bigger the box or the bigger the bubble, the higher internet use in that country, right? And the darker the shade of blue, the higher percentage of internet penetration, i.e. there are more people in that country as a percentage of the population who have access to and use the internet. So if we go back to 2005, which was 2 years before the iPhone came out, it was around the time that Mark Zuckerberg acquired the domain for Facebook.com, and it was roughly around the time that Google Maps launched. US was certainly king. There were 200 million internet users in the US. Compare that back to in China, it was only half that, right, at 100 million. And at that time, there weren't a ton of cyber issues, right? There were lots of sort of email spam scandals out there. Spam was just starting to get going and starting to become an issue. If you jump forward, I can't remember if I said this already, but at this time there were about 1 billion users on the internet, which is why we start in 2005. In 2015, between 2005 and 2015, there was a huge explosion in internet usage, right? So suddenly there were about 3.4 billion people using the internet. A huge part, a reason for that growth was the development of cloud technologies, right? And with the availability of the cloud and the functionality of the cloud, people could store more data. We start to see the development of the Internet of Things and artificial intelligence and machine learning, right? So it's all growing. The interesting thing is, look how much bigger China and India are than they, if you remember previously. and the US stays roughly static. So in 2015, the US has about 287 million internet users. China has 751 million internet users, and India is at 283 million. But there's still, most of these countries in Asia in particular aren't very dark blue yet, right? There's still a lot of growth. But we see the internet pretty much in internet usage in every country by most commercial organizations, most governments, et cetera. And you also see a huge increase, related increase in cybersecurity issues, right? Suddenly, even governments are getting involved in cyber attacks. If we fast forward quickly to 2025, the projection is that there will be more than 5 billion internet users, right? And so what's that going to mean? I mean, China is certainly a lot darker blue, but there are a lot of countries that are still growing. And we're going to have lots of policy issues around what do governments do around security, around state actors, around data sovereignty issues, right, versus the free flow of data in the cloud. So that's yet to be seen, but this is, I think, a great way to see or to trace basically the expansion of internet usage and then the increase in the evolution of cyber attacks, right? So if we go back roughly the same time period, back to 2003, 2004, really the motive there was mischief, right? It was high school kids or, guys in their boxers in their basement late at night, on the computer, just really trying to mess around. That has really changed, though, again, starting back in 2005, where the motive has become profit, right? I mean, drug dealers aren't selling drugs anymore. I mean, they still are. But a lot of people, a lot of organized crime has moved over into doing cyber attacks, right? With the expansion of Google, we saw the growth of click fraud, and certainly today, over that time, we see a lot of identity theft as well. And as I've said already, now we really see, starting in about 2012 and today and in the future, the attacks are much more brazen, as this says, brazen, complex, and persistent. But you see governments involved. You see terror groups involved, right, in these attacks. And as Adam was talking about, I think you mentioned specifically IP theft. I mean, that's huge, and then that will continue to grow. That's something that we're definitely seeing. But it's not necessarily a profit motive, right? It's really just to go in and damage and disrupt as well, just generally. I always like to get pretty basic with things, and apologies for the really technical people in the audience. This will probably be too basic, but it works for my mind. And it's really breaking down, what is a cyber attack? And think about, explaining this to your compliance people or your boards of directors, et cetera, right? And basically, you can break down a cyber attack, as this does, into an attack payload and a delivery mechanism, right? They're really two different things. So the delivery mechanism is really looking for the vulnerability, right? It's the truck that's trying to drive through, to ram through the barrier. This is an example here of, or a breakdown of WannaCry, which is where I'm heading now. And basically, the delivery mechanism was Eternal Blue, which was a weakness, a vulnerability in the Windows operating system, and also Double Pulsar, which is a tool for exploiting that vulnerability. So that was the delivery mechanism to deliver sort of ransomware, i.e., the virus, the malware that went in, locked down people's computers and requested Bitcoin in return in order to return the data. I mean, data, as Adam said, is the new currency, and it's also what sort of cyber criminals are going after. So in terms of your attack payload, I mean, it obviously multiple different things. This is the symbol on this slide for ransomware, but it's looking for Bitcoin, spiders, backdoors, Trojan horses, cameras. The idea there is tracking what people are typing and passwords, things that get typed into a computer. So at its very basic, that is what a cyber attack is, right? There's a delivery mechanism, and it delivers what is going to be unleashed on your system. This was an actual screenshot from a WannaCry attack back in May of this year. And you can see it says, "What happened to my computer? Your important files are encrypted. Many of your documents may no longer be accessible. Can I recover my files? How do I pay?" Right? So that was an actual screenshot. It took a. I understand that it was primarily Bitcoin, but apparently you could also pay in other means as well, at least on the screen. So from a Microsoft perspective, all right, this is Microsoft's view of what happened. I think it's pretty accurate. And again, why that view is important is because the WannaCry attack was primarily on the Windows operating system. So for the technical folks in the room who use Windows, you may have remembered that the Microsoft released a patch in March of 2017. Specifically related to, let's go back here, the payload that I talked about, to the Eternal Blue vulnerability and against the double pulsar tools. Now, there's a group on the internet known as the shadow brokers, and what they did was they basically hacked into the NSA and were able to identify that the National Security Administration in the US was using had identified different vulnerabilities across different platforms, including Microsoft. And they were using those vulnerabilities. They didn't come and tell Microsoft or the other platform operators, right, that they had identified those exploits, but that's how they were using, those vulnerabilities was what the US government was using, right, to go out and do its own sort of cyber espionage or attacks. So the NSA exploits were released a month after Microsoft had released a patch to fix the vulnerabilities. And then suddenly, a month later, the WannaCry ransomware attack happened. That same day, Microsoft issued different technical advisories. The interesting thing, it spread ultimately over 150 countries to something like 230 computers, but you may have read in the paper that there was a young security expert in the UK who was able to identify a problem within the code itself, within the WannaCry code, and basically he was able to go in and register a domain which helped to stop the spread of the virus. Telefonica, the company in Spain, was one of the first companies to report it. It shut down the health system, the NHS, the National Health System in the UK. It attacked Renault, the car maker, but it sort of slowed by the time that the United States came online. There weren't a lot of issues specifically or problems in New Zealand, they believe, because it happened here over the weekend, right? And a lot of businesses, whatever, were already shut down. People weren't opening emails, etc. This outlines quickly Microsoft's response, which is, assess or detect, protect, and respond. So basically, right away, we have teams security teams who work 24/7, around the world, big base in Redmond, Singapore, and the UK. And so very quickly, our MMPC, which is the Microsoft Malware Protection Center, released signatures so that those customers who'd been affected could go in and identify and detect the malware and its presence, although it made itself known pretty quickly, right, when the computer was turned on. But the idea was to try and go in and detect it before it was unleashed. One of the big issues that often appears, and you may be familiar with, is Microsoft no longer provides updates for Windows XP. It's a product that we've shut down over a decade ago, although many folks are still on it and using it. And so we did something quite unusual is that we actually released a security patch update for Windows XP to protect those people. We were highly criticized for doing that, right? Because people said that that was just encouraging people to stay on Windows XP rather than to update their systems. But it's one of those areas where you often can't win. And we continued for a while to have hotlines available. Here in New Zealand, we had our different services team members go out to different customers who thought that they may have been infected. But there were actually no identified cases that we were notified of, and we worked very closely with the CERT, which is based in Wellington, to make certain that information around the attack was circulated. So just walk quickly through these key learnings, and I really want you to think about your own organization, right? How it updates, right? What you would have done if this if WannaCry had made itself known in your organization. I mean, the key message from us is that everyone is a target. With ransomware, everybody's got some data, right, that's important to them, whether it's your personal computer with all of your photos of your kids and grandkids, or if it's the intellectual property of your organization. And that's what we really see cybercriminals going after today. The other thing to consider is that the time to patch has reduced significantly. If you think about the timeline, Microsoft released the patch in March. The exploits, the shadow brokers, identified the exploits that the NSA was using, and a month later, WannaCry ransomware was released. So think about your patching, how that is done in your organization, and recognize that the time to do that has been, again, reduced significantly. And where we're going is, and pushing our customers is really toward automation. In the past as well, in terms of patching, people would do it sort of slowly over a period of time, test it with all of their different systems. We get that. That makes sense. But that time is arguably gone. The time to do that is arguably gone now. Attackers can come in different directions. WannaCry, the reason why we're talking about it is because it impacted people in 150 countries, right? But as Adam said, the average time that attacker is within your systems is somewhere around 150, 160 days, right, before they make themselves known. So they're, although that happened and it was in the news and we sort of followed it around the world, generally, attackers have stayed hidden for a much longer time. The final sort of key learning in this piece is really the critical nature, the criticality of good hygiene, right? Of patching more frequently, making certain that you're, on the latest and greatest, and really having a strong and defined cyber posture, right? Think about if WannaCry had happened to you, or say it happens this afternoon, you're dealing with this for your organization, what would you go in and tell the board? How would you respond? Do you have a developed cyber posture? So the framework that I referenced quickly at the beginning to take away really is, protect, detect, and respond, right? So the thing to focus on is you need to, you may not be able to protect everything, but at a minimum, you should be protecting your key assets, right? Often that's data, certainly it's identity, it's your different apps, infrastructure. We sell the cloud, and the cloud isn't the answer to every question, but certainly there are a lot of great threat detection platforms out there, right? And that's what, again, our digital crimes unit does a lot of work. When Microsoft goes out and takes down a bot network, we take all of that information, the identity, and feed that back into our own products, right? And from a cloud perspective, that means that the security gets updated on sometimes a daily basis. And again, finally, what is your response going to be? You have to assume that you're going to be breached at some point, and maybe already. So what is your cyber response going to be? Again, we're a cloud vendor, so I would be remiss in not talking about the cloud. Microsoft spent $1 billion last year on security, right? And so, a lot of people saying that now that Microsoft really is a security company, right? And there's arguably some truth in that. But with the cloud, you get the built-in security. You have privacy by design to protect your data, right? Adam mentioned increasing compliance, right? Particularly in highly regulated areas and industries. The cloud enables you to manage those requirements and to stay in sync with what you need to do in your particular area or vertical. And it's all done in sort of a transparent way. I mean, a lot of the concerns with the cloud, not so much anymore, but it was really around where is my data, how do I get access to it, who has access to it, right? And today, particularly at least from a Microsoft perspective, we are very clear, about where your data is in all of our different services, right? I was talking, it was Adrian I was talking to earlier. One of the interesting things, though, is, just because you put something in the cloud doesn't mean that it's secure, end of story. A lot of if you take a product like Office 365, there are, still controls, right, that need to be turned on. And whether it's a cloud product or whether it's an on-premise product, what we find a lot of time is that the security controls have simply been turned off, right? And oftentimes, that really is a problem, or the threat may not be coming from the outside. The threat may actually be internal, right, from a disgruntled employee or elsewhere. So that is another scenario that you need to consider as well. Anyway, that was a quick summary. I hopefully that was relevant and useful. I became, I guess, quite fascinated by the WannaCry virus in particular, because I was getting calls at 5 a.m. on the Saturday morning when it first started. So we definitely lived through it with our customers, and I think it's a useful takeaway when you go back to your own organization. So thank you.